That brings us to item 15 on the discussion agenda, which is the discussion of the June 30th, 2023 fund ballots analysis and assignment recommendation as seen in Exhibit F. Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. At this time, to go over our fund balance analysis and assignment, of our CFO, Ms. Madison Paul.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Ross. Thank you for allowing me to discuss the assignment of general fund balance for fiscal year 2023. So I did want to start with kind of where we are as of our most recent audit. So our most recent audit was in fiscal year 2022. As y'all know, we are actively working on the last school year's audit. So looking at just the fund balance of last year, overall total fund balance to start the year, so the year before, was $51,205,287. We had three categories of fund balance. The first one is non-spendable. If y'all will recall before when we talked about the different categories, non-spendable is our inventory and our prepaid expenses. At June 30th, 2022, we had about $4.3 million in that category. The second category is assigned, which is usually our board commitment. So those are the items that y'all actually vote on as a board to be assigned. And as of June 30th of 2022, we had about $9.3 million in that category. And that kind of leaves everything else in the unassigned, which was roughly $5 million as of June 30th of 2022. As a reminder, we do have a board policy that our unassigned fund balance must stay within the range of 15 to 18% of our budgeted expenditures. And as of June 30 of last year, it was right at 17.9% of the FY23 budget, which is in line with board policy. So we start there, and then I wanted to talk about, what we actually spent last fiscal year from the assignment. So of the 9.3 that, again, y'all assigned roughly this time last year, it was broken down into really four main assignments. The first one was the District 5 snack program. So this was actually through our student nutrition group where they provided an individual snack to every student in the district last year during kind of different times of the day, not necessarily at lunch. We also funded the NEST program at Irmo High School, which is about $1.5 million was the budget for that. Y'all approved $3 million for an employee appreciation gift, and this was around November 18th last year. That was $1,000 for every active employee at that time. And then also the last assignment was for Irmo High School construction. So what we just heard, y'all assigned about $3.5 million to go towards that overall budget of Irmo High School. So then we look at, okay, well, what did we actually spend? And again, keep in mind, this is unaudited at this time. But for the D5 snack program, we did, of course, allocate every student that wanted a snack throughout the school year. That ended up coming in under budget, and we spent about $620,000 of that $1.3 million that was assigned for that program. The NEST program, similar as well, we did come in under budget. This was for a few reasons. So when y'all first talked about the NEST, I guess more like a year and a half ago, there was several assignments for teachers, teacher assistants, there was a principal, and then there were expectation coaches in different levels. And I think throughout the year, they were able to really use existing resources in some capacities, and then also, of course, add on to existing positions, but overall did not need the entire budget. So only used about $428,000 of that $1.5 million. For the employee appreciation gift, again, right at November of last year, we did use most of that $3 million. So that was about $2.9 million that came in for that budget for the employee appreciation bonus. And then, of course, with Irmo High School, since we're still talking about the construction documents, the only piece of that was used was the actual purchase of the land. So that was about $613,000. So of the total $9.3 million that was assigned, about 4.5 was used, which would leave a remaining 4.7 that was really unused last year. So I also want to talk about our revenue increase over budget. So the FY23 budgeted revenue was $213,711,968. So we have a couple of categories that actually came in over budget. The first one I want to mention is our local revenue piece. So a lot of times we think about this as our property tax revenue. What we found in this past year is that our real estate property taxes actually came in under budget. But where we actually did make up some of that ground was on our vehicle taxes. So y'all can kind of imagine in your own household, the assessed value or the cost of vehicles is going up, used or new, and we definitely saw that from our property tax standpoint. So we did receive about 1.1 million over budget in our local revenue, and this came in to be about 1.5% over our total budget from property taxes. The other item that came in over budget was interest income. So again, as we all know, interest rates have gone up pretty significantly since we were looking at this from a budget standpoint, over a year ago. So our interest income was about 1.5 million over budget. The other piece, really the biggest piece of this is our state revenue. So as y'all know, that's our state revenue comes up to about 63% of our total general fund budget. And of that, we were pleased to actually collect about 1.7 million more than we thought that we would at budget time. This is really attributable to, of course, our state aid to classrooms that is allocated directly from the state. We also had some increases in the manufacturer reimbursement that we received from the state, and also our Tier 3 reimbursement that we get. So I know when I talk monthly about our Tier 1, our Tier 2, and our Tier 3 property tax revenue that actually comes in from the state. So that Tier 3 is really that homestead exemption and the sales tax that Act 388 from 2006, where they exempted all owner-occupied property taxes from school districts, and then in turn give you a sales tax from that. That's Tier 3. So we actually received a little bit more than we thought we would at budget time from a state revenue side. Additionally, we had some excess from our indirect cost transfer. So this actually is a rate that is provided to us from the state. And so when we do have federal funds, we are able to charge that money, these indirect cost rates that is attributable to us, and that comes in the form of a revenue from the general fund side. And then lastly, that miscellaneous is really several different items, but a few of the notes are insurance proceeds, rebates, legal settlements, and other reimbursements. So in total, we were fortunate, certainly last year, that we do expect to see about a $5.3 million increase in revenue over budget. Again, this is unaudited at this time. We'll certainly true it up when we get our audited financials, but I wanted to make sure that y'all were aware of, even though we did have some assignments and we did expect to go into fund balance, we actually had some revenue that offset that fund balance dip. So kind of tying it all together, and I know there's a lot of numbers on the screen, but hopefully we can go through this together. So again, I wanted to start with what we know. So our audited financials as of June 30th, 2022 showed a total fund balance of right at 52 million. We used 4.5 of that, so that was that assignment that we've already gone through. But we also had revenue over budget, so that really adds to our fund balance. And then we also really did a good job as far as expenditures, and we had some savings in purchase services and supplies that equated to about 1.8 million. So overall, our total projected fund balance as of June 30th, 2023 is 54,621,524. So a slight increase from the previous year. So again, as we look at our different buckets of fund balance, I just want to make sure that we're keeping everything separate. So our non-spendable fund balance as of June 30, 2023, again, unaudited, is expected to be about 3.6 million. This is our inventory and our prepaid expenses. And then if y'all recall, on June 12th, 2023, y'all already made 2 assignments. The first one was to just reassign the Irmo High School construction money. So that was about 2.8. And then additionally, y'all approved 6 additional teachers for critical areas, which is about 543,000. So just a reminder, that was for any time that we have teachers in critical areas that in case we are truly at 100% as far as hiring teachers, that we can go above and beyond if needed. We have kind of found in the past that due to vacancy rates and things like that, that usually does not hit fund balance, but it is there just as a windfall in case. But we do have some recommendations, again, not for vote tonight, just for discussion, but at this time I'll turn that over to Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Our recommendation, again, for discussion tonight is 2 assignments of that fund balance mirroring what we did last year. The first one would be for all active employees on November the 17th for American Education Week to do a employee retention incentive. We want to thank all of those who have or continue to stay with our district. We know it is hard to retain and recruit teachers and staff. Sometimes there's incentives to bring people to your district, but there's a need to appreciate those who stay with you. So this would be a $1,000 employee retention incentive paid during American Education Week. And then, as we did last year, we did a $3.5 million assignment for Irmo High School. I would like, the recommendation is to bring the same assignment for our 5-year facilities plan. This is for discussion tonight, but we will have on October 23rd more data from our facilities conditions assessment to see the dire state that our school district is in. Right now, we also would like to present some options to this board, and we don't have the resources to do it. I've been presenting a plan about a flow of moving all of our schools, elementary schools, to K through 5, having only middle schools and no intermediate schools. And without one additional building, I'm at a loss of how to make that happen. I can't come up with a plan without the land. Board policy FEE allows the administration to do feasibility and to provide to this body up to what's called a letter of intent to purchase. We cannot purchase a property, but we can bring, after doing due diligence of flood zone, traffic counts, environmental studies, working with Department of Transportation, OSF, we can actually engage with owners to get contingent approval, what's called a letter for intent to purchase. We would still have to come to this body for final approval, but we would like to exercise this $3.5 million to really acquire, to begin acquiring the land that we need, specifically in the Dutch Fork area, to make this zoning plan work. We'll present, and I know MPS is working on the worst case scenario. We don't get any funds to do anything. How would that look? It has been my goal through this plan to only change the zoning lines around the Lake Murray Elementary Ballantyne area. Without that, I'm looking at changing lines from Piney Woods to Piney Grove. That would be something I would like to avoid. Again, there's no vote tonight, but it is the administration's intent to exercise board policy FEE to present some options to this body so that we could be least disruptive in the rezoning plan. Again, I wanted to, these are the same assignments we did last year, but we're justifying them in new ways this year. The 3.5 went to one project. Last year at Irmo High School, the 3.5 this year would go to the entire 5-year facilities plan. And we will, as you will see on October 23rd, when we get the full weight of the facility needs, we would like to provide some options, and that's why we are asking for these assignments. So.
Yes, sir. Yes, the only thing I would like to add is just that, so that would get us to an overall recommended assigned fund balance of $9.9 million, as shown on your screen, leaving a remaining unassigned of $41,054,051, and this is 17.6% of the budgeted expenditures for the current fiscal year. So still within board policy DFAB for reserve funds.
Okay, Dr. Ross, I have a question, just something that I noticed that was on last year, and it was unique because of the situation. Last year we had the the 1.3 million for the D5 snack program, and we only spent 600,000, and that program has been discontinued this year. Why would we not continue that if that was a possibility? I mean, how did that work in practice? I'm just curious as to when we're talking about using the fund balance for our students, just
And I think
not negating the other items on here. I'm just curious as to.
right. If you look at last year, in terms of what we had to assign to get into that board policy, we had more money to assign last year. We could definitely add that back. That would get us, we wouldn't be close to the 18%. I think our issue that we faced this year was just worrying about with all of the revenue that was injected into our economy through the COVID stimulus. I worried very much what would happen when that flattened out, what that would do to our revenue. And so I did not want to go closer to that 15% by doing additional assignments. What we saw was a change in our, as we talked about with our CEP program. We added, I think, 4 new schools, which we never like to bring something where the administration disagrees to the board. We always like to be in sync, but I worry about covering 40% because we typically go in the hole in those situations. So it was more of a notion of not being confident that we could continue that program going forth.
And I think as well, with it coming from fund balance and really being a continual need, then at some point we would have to allocate it through our just general expenditures. So I think, last year it was just a one-time thing, and if we continue it at some point, it would end up having to go under our just regular general fund expenditures.
Okay, any questions, Ms. Huddle?
I know we're not voting on anything tonight, but back in early June, when we were looking at raising the millage, I sent an email out, and I've got something I want to add to the minutes that includes that email. But at that point, since 2017, we had moved $8.5 million out of the operating fund to the capital fund, and I realize that all predated the majority of this board. I did vote for one of those because I didn't know the background either. At the time, I'm thinking, well, we've got this money, we have a need at Irmo High School, let's move it. But now here we are again, and there's a pattern here. If we move this $3.5 million to capital, it'll be over $12 million that has been moved out of operating to capital. And that may sound like, well, you're just moving it from one bucket to another. But it is really important because the operating fund is designed to take care of the day-to-day operations of the schools and educate our children. The tax basis is also different, okay? If someone owns a $2 million home, they're not paying any of the operating fund. So when we passed that millage increase, it largely fell on people that rent their home, whether they rent an apartment or they rent a house, because the person that owns that property is getting that tax increase, and so now they raise the rent. Also, those individuals rely on their cars, and the cars, as we just heard, was a big part of why the taxes went up. So I'm very concerned that we keep doing this. Now, it's too late now, but I hope that we'll think about this next May when we're looking at the budget. But I would say let's not do it again. I mean, that's the definition of insanity, is keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Let's use the money for what it was intended for. So before we vote on this in a couple weeks, I would like to propose we look at a couple things. One is this bonus. It's been $1,000 since I've been on the board, and we all know that prices have gone way up. And our staff, while they've had some salary increases, they're subject to that too. So I would say let's raise it to $1,300, okay, for example, that would use 4 million instead of 3 million. Let's take the other 2.5 million and let's do voluntary tutoring. We've got teachers who would probably gladly get extra pay to tutor kids before school and after school, and that would also help us academically with especially our math and our reading scores. And there may be other opportunities as well. I just think we owe that to the taxpayers who paid this money to use it for operating expenses, and we owe it to our staff and our students. Our job is to put students first. And I realize buildings are important, but they're not more important than the learning opportunities for your students and for your staff to help them. And we have an opportunity now that'll help make up for some of the losses that we've had due to the pandemic. So just to encourage us to think about using it for operating.
Dr. Ross, I know you want to comment on that.
I do. I think because it goes to a clarification that I need to defend this administration for, and I politely disagree. I think I can't divorce the quality of the building from the quality of the learning environment. The textbook says exactly what you said, that we maintain our facilities with the debt service, we pay our teachers and supplies with the operating. If that was the textbook reality, I would agree 100%. What you're going to see on October 23rd is we're not in a textbook situation. You can use your operating to address issues of capital. When I go to these schools, and you go to these schools, have we met the minimum quality of our facilities to provide educational opportunities for our children? And we haven't. We haven't, and that's the legal responsibility of this board. And so I just hope that we would wait till October 23rd, see that data, see the conditions that our facilities are in and that we're asking our teachers to educate in, and then let's make the best decision with that. But we're not in a textbook situation. So because you can use operating funds to fix the issues that we have, and once we get the 5-year plan in and the 10-year plan in and we're set, I'm with you. I would never want to use operating to fix the issues that we have. But when the air conditioner's out, or the heat doesn't work, we have plumbing issues, we have rodents and sewer issues, we have to get these things addressed. So I have purposely stayed out of the way of MPS, have met with them, stayed totally independent, so that we hear at the same time the conditions. But this is just coming from what we see when we walk these schools. The standard of educational excellence in this district is very high, but we have to give our teachers and staff the places to be in order to do it. 3.5 is a lot of money, I know, and I want to give our teachers more. But I have to be able to meet those facilities and impairments that I can't separate from the educational experiences for our kids. So I just want to provide that clarification. I do want to stop this but that's not our reality. So when we meet on October 23rd, let's look at this together and see what's the best way to attack that problem.
Dr. Ross, I have a question kind of following up on something that Ms. Huddle mentioned, and she's mentioned it before in previous meetings about spending money on after-school tutoring. And you may not know the answer to this right now, but my question is related to, I think that's a great idea. I think that it's a great idea to have after-school tutoring. I think that probably every student in our district would benefit from that. My question is whether or not, is there an internal policy, or a procedure from the operational district side, that's not a board policy, that prohibits teachers from tutoring students at school? Because it's my understanding that there is. So is that something that, does that matter whether or not if we have a special supplement how does that work? Because if there are, parents paying for tutoring and they have to, make arrangements to do it off-site because it doesn't work at school, but then we implement an after-school tutoring program where some students get, I'm just trying to make sure that we're fair across the board with after-school tutoring.
So Ms. McAllister, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't pay your child's teacher to tutor. But to Ms. Huddle's point, we have allocated additional funds out of ESSER. So I'm going to ask Ms. McCaskill if you can speak to what we're doing in terms of the tutoring front there.
That's correct. So every school has been given $25,000 for tutoring for this year, for after-school tutoring. And so we do have families that are able to take advantage of that. We don't have quite as many staff members who are able to assist with that after hours with other commitments that they have, but we have a good bit taking place at all of our schools now.
So if well, I guess I'm just trying to, to me, if we're going to expand that program, are more students going to be eligible to participate, or can arrangements be made, across district-wide, that if you're not in that program, that teachers can utilize school facilities for tutoring? I'm just curious. I've been asked that question several times because it logistically provides complications for families.
Yeah, we just don't allow for the families to pay the teacher on site to use our facilities, because the teacher doesn't pay facilities fees for the use of the facilities because they're not really doing school business at that point. So that is part of the policy for that. If we increased the amount of money that we were to put into tutoring, I'm going to be very honest, I don't know that we would have enough teachers to teach, to even utilize much more funding. Our teachers, at the end of the day, many of them have to go home to families and things like that, and they just aren't able to spend a lot of extra time after school to do the after-school tutoring.
So we've made it available. We've had 25,000, at minimum 25,000 per school for increase out of the ESSER. We'll use that as a kind of a guide stick there. But we encourage parents, take advantage of what we have. Fill up the existing seats. But to your point, the only thing we cannot do, and listen, I'm guilty of it, but I've used, it was not my child's teacher, and I paid a District 5 teacher to tutor my children in my living room. Mm-hmm. So you can do that, but you can't use it on the district property. And so so we're also working on supplement schedules for clubs and activities, because to that point, it may be an opportunity to get kids involved. It might not be a direct instructional link to math and English, but through arts, through athletics, through career-related activities, you can also get gains that way.
Okay. Did I see a hand raised over here, Mr. Satterfield?
Dr. Ross explained exactly. We used to have enrichment, so every day for 30 minutes, teachers would have students come and get activities. But it's a very difficult, and I appreciate Ms. Huddle thinking outside the box. I think, again, you brought that up multiple times, and it is what seemed to be a very obvious thing that we need to do. It's just a very difficult thing when your kids got to get on the bus, or parents can't come get kids 30 minutes later, and they can't get transportation. But we have tried different things in the past. I know that, and there are kids that need it, but we do have a policy says teacher, or we did anyway, that teachers cannot use district facilities to make extra money. So anyway.
Yeah, just one other point about the tutoring. In theory, it sounds like a great idea, and it is. However, like you were saying, you're competing against the private sector market, really, because a teacher can go out and tutor one child in their living room for $40 a session. But if we put them into an organized district school-based program, they may have 4 or 5 kids that they're tutoring at one time, which is a whole nother, it's a class essentially. And not only, and so that $40 per session is now $10 per kid instead of 40. So economically, it doesn't make sense for the teacher, or it's not very incentivizing. And then for the student perspective, they're not getting the quality of instruction, because if you have multiple kids in a tutoring session, you're not able to meet their individual needs. They're all at different levels in different places. So it's a more complicated matter than what you would think of off the hand.
Oh, I definitely understand. I just logistically, I mean, when we're talking about adding, a couple $1 million into a tutoring program, I'm just wondering how that works. I mean, and how that works with everyone. Yeah, Ms. Huddle.
Well, first of all, I wasn't suggesting that was the only possible use of the money. So it was just, again.
It's not a bad idea.
Right. I would just like us to look at, we have so many needs. We have so many kids that are not proficient in English and math in particular. But related to Mr. Scully's point, so a question, is there any reason we can't pay the teacher like they would externally? Can we pay them $40 or $50 an hour to tutor one child? Is there any reason we can't do that?
And I think with the max increase that Ms. McCaskill put in the schools, we can meet market rate. I would like to just give this an opportunity. We have ESSER. It leaves this year. And so this is a great place to place it. Her and her staff came up with a way to edit the ESSER plan for the tutoring. And so we'll bring back how that's going. I think we're just kind of starting it up. Report cards are coming out. That usually is what triggers tutoring. And so we're looking forward to that. But I think the biggest thing is just making sure we can target the need. The parents that see the value in it, they take advantage of it. It's getting those students that we really need to get our arms around, meeting those barriers, whether it's transportation, to be a part of it. And the other thing is, and I'm an example of that child. Before I would sit down for your math and English, I needed another activity, and it was arts or athletics. And so as we expand that builds that relationship where the child is ready to sit down and start reading. So as all of these expand this year, but to that point, we have put that additional money in and look to see, to bring back to this body how that's working.
All right, thank you. Any other questions relating to this discussion item? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Madison. Ms. Paul. That moves us to item 16, discussion of new board policy JICFB, Gavin's Law Implementation, Exhibit G.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We received a memo from the State Department of Education on August 29th regarding the Gavin's Law implementation requirements, and our Chief of Student Services and Planning, Dr. Harris, will bring that policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ross, members of the board, and our general community. There's new legislation, Gavin's Law. It can be found and identified under South Carolina Code of Laws, Section 1615-430, that references violations, if you will, of sexual extortion. And as a result of that, we've had a collaboration and communications by way of the SLED, State Department of Education, as well as the Attorney General's office, who crafted the legislation. And as a result, there is a model policy that you currently have from our School Boards Association that speaks to that for districts across South Carolina. Contingent upon our ultimate readings and looking forward to your approval, this Gavin's Law will be incorporated into our Student Code of Conduct as a one of the violations and one of the levels that we currently have, as well as incorporated into the staff code of conduct as well. In any instance, and in all instances, this would include law enforcement. I'll simply conclude that this law also pertains to this particular model policy. We have also in partnership with our academics office, who, by way of our school counselors, will make available information, education, and awareness to all of our students, our parents, and other persons throughout the community. So with that, we present to you this new policy, Gavin's Law implementation, and for your approval. I'll certainly try to respond to any questions you might have.
Any questions? All right. Thank
Did
you,
have
Mary.
one question.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Hubbard.
Okay, and
Oh, okay.
I apologize because I didn't print it out. So with a lot of our policies, we have an R that talks about actually the mechanics of it. So are we going to have an R with this as well, or do you think we don't need an R?
I'm certainly willing to consult with our School Boards Association in reference to whether or not there is a thought behind having an R for this. As we all aware, some of our policies, as you indicated, do have an R, so I'm not sure and have not heard that this one would, but certainly willing between now and first reading to inquire to see if in fact that's a thought process.
Okay, because, I mean, I guess the other thing I'm kind of fixated on is the second paragraph, the last sentence says, you know, implement a policy to educate and notify students of the provision of this law, which includes adequate notice to students, parents, guardians, public. So maybe we do or don't need an R, but we are going to have a plan to educate everybody. Correct.
That is absolutely right. And as we referenced earlier, in collaboration and partnership with the Office of Academics through school counseling, that plan will be developed and communicated that way.
To all students.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And that would identify what constitutes adequate notice?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Any other? All right, thank you, Dr.
Oh,
Harris.
thank you.
That moves us to 17 on our discussion agenda, which is discussion of revisions to Board Policy GBEB, Staff Conduct, Exhibit H.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board and our community. We bring Dr. Turner, our Chief of Human Resources Officer, to discuss. This is a policy that we have considered in the past. We have Attorney Kathy Mahoney here who helped us draft this policy, and so I'll have Dr. Turner begin the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Ross. This discussion provides an opportunity for the board to determine revisions and updates to policy GBEB, staff conduct. The original policy was issued in 2009, and as you can imagine, since 2009, we've had a number of laws as well as other district policies that the board has adopted that determines how we deal with staff conduct issues. We've had an opportunity to work with Attorney Mahoney, who's present here tonight, and she'll offer some insights regarding the policy revisions as well. You'll notice on the revised version of the policy, it's more concise, it's updated, it has references to some of the policies that we've adopted. So with that being said, I'm going to invite Attorney Mahoney to present some insight to us.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Ross. You have before you the proposed revisions to GBEB. As Dr. Turner mentioned, this was last revised in 2009, and there's certainly been a number of laws since then. And I think the world has changed a bit in the last 14 years in terms of particularly electronic conduct and communications. So in the policy, just a quick overview of the key changes. These recommended revisions, by the way, that we're providing to you all are consistent with recommendations we provided to boards across the state on these very issues. But the overarching issue is it provides clarity to employees about expectations for staff conduct, which is important for employees to have a clear understanding of it. It also then gives clear guidance to the administration for addressing the conduct. So it's important for both ends, both for the employees to understand the expectations and then for the administration to have a roadmap to address it. Key areas addressed are employee speech and social media. That's, you can see one large part of it. It's not so much new, it's more just additional guidance. And also the guidance specifically references the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in the Pickering case and then the Fourth Circuit's decision in the Gutzmacher case. And these are cases we consistently talk about across the state with school administrators, school employees, about their compliance with this, both employee speech issues as well as social media. There's also a section, of course, that addresses a key issue, and that's employee conduct with students. And it incorporates multiple existing board policies that deal with that. And then there's several other provisions that just incorporate lots of other existing policies. The second paragraph says, you obviously have to comply with all board policies. This is not an intent to relist every board policy, but it's intended to sort of bring in the key ones to put them in front of everybody and give a nice roadmap both for expectations as well as sort of enforcement and applicability. So those are the overall thoughts I would make, and I'm certainly happy to answer, Dr. Turner, I can answer any questions you all may have.
Thank you. Do I have any questions? Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. On the first, or the original, the current policy, the fourth statement says, the personal life of an employee will be the concern of and warrant the attention of the board only if the employee's action, But in the rewrite, and there are several changes in the rewrite, but it says only was taking out. Can you tell me why? And it makes it a little ambiguous when it says the personal life of an employee, including the personal use of district-issued and non-issued or non-district issued electronic equipment, inside and outside, I hate to read the whole thing, through social networking sites, social media, personal portrayal on the internet, will be the concern of the warrant the attention of the board. And then the other one, the first one is very clear cut. It says only if it impairs the employee's ability, but this one says if it impairs the employee's ability to effectively perform their responsibilities.
Sure. What this does is that sentence at the end, it really just expands on it. So where the sentence at the end struck through was just one sentence, this really broadens it and expands it.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little concerned with that. I think that with the direction that social media is going, I guess, and Lord knows where it's going to go next year and the year after, but I think when it says only, that means the board will only get involved if it specifically affects the efficiency and the performance. Otherwise, the board can choose to get involved.
Right, and I don't think that this changes the meaning of that, because what it says is, if it's still, the concept is still, I mean, the language at the end is really incorporated into the expanded version is what I'm saying, because
Right.
It still says, if it impairs their ability to effectively perform their job, or if it violates law, and then you expect all this conduct to not disrupt the school work environment or impair the efficiency of the workplace. And those are the two provisions right out of what the U.S. Supreme Court talks about back in the 60s on speech, and then
Right.
also what the Fourth Circuit talks about now.
Sure.
And it ultimately says this policy will be applied consistent with the legal principles on the issue of employee expression set forth in these cases. So clearly the intent is to guide the administration to apply case law into how you analyze each fact-specific situation.
Right, and I
So
went
it's-
back and I reread both of those cases just to make sure that I was looking at it properly. But it just says the original one, I think they specifically put that only in there to keep some separation there, I guess. I did have a couple other questions. Where it says in the fourth paragraph of the new one, it says, where it says the personal life of an employee, and it goes through all the networking sites, social media, personal portrayal on the internet. And then it says, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The board expects employees to ensure all their conduct and communications, including those associated with social media and electronic communications, do not disrupt the school work environment or impair the efficiency of the school workplace. What does impair the efficiency?
Excellent question. And that's the phrasing that the U.S. Supreme Court talks about, and it's the phrasing that the Grutzmacher case talks about in the Fourth Circuit. And what they do is apply that standard in both cases, and they break down the facts. And, impair the efficiency of the workplace, ultimately, when you look at the factual application of it, really talks about disrupting things, making the workplace not efficient, not effective. So in the workplaces in the Grutzmacher case are fire station and fire department officials. So it's not the same thing as students being educated in a school system.
Right.
But it's broadly applied.
Well, the Pickering case, that's where the only sort of comes into play for me when I was rereading that thing, because the teacher that expressed her concerns in the news, it really did not affect her ability to do her job, and it had to go all the way to the United States Supreme Court for them to make that decision that she had the right of free speech. I just think that only should be consistent with the first, and I am concerned about to impair the efficiency of the school workplace. And I had, do we want to stay on that, or?
Well, I just want to make sure that I open it up for other people to ask questions as well. So, do we have Ms. Huddle?
I actually have I guess a similar concern, and I'm thinking about for the administration is you can't ask all our staff members to read case law and figure out what they can and can't do. And I'm just going to throw an example at you, because the thing that sticks out in my mind is do not disrupt the school work environment. Okay, that's a very broad statement. So if I'm a teacher in Irmo and I go out on all my social media and say, Irmo sucks, I hate Irmo, it's the worst place in the world, does that qualify? Am I disrupting the school work environment? I mean, those are the kind of things we got to think about.
Yeah, and that is exactly what administrators and I can assure you your human resources staff has to navigate all the time, not just in this district, but everywhere in the state and everywhere in the country. And each situation is fact specific. And so, and I've done videos that go across the state that some districts require employees to watch. I think y'all are one of them. And I talk about the Grutzmacher case. There are probably lots of people who've heard about that case across the state. And in that case, because of the type of social media and the content of it, the court concluded that in that situation, it disrupted the work environment. In the Pickering case, as Mr. Satterfield mentioned, that was a teacher who back in the 60s wrote a letter just to the editor saying the school board should spend more on academics and athletics. That was the message. And there was no evidence that that impaired the efficiency of the workplace or disrupted anything. And so the court said, you can't fire someone for that. But the flip side is, in the Grutzmacher case, you're taking a lot of communications. They were racially derogatory and absolutely disrupted the workplace and impacted even the confidence in the fire department and the sort of the system. So every case is fact specific. You can't say this is right or this is wrong, but this gives a framework, a legal framework, to say, make sure you're thoughtful in how you conduct yourself through public communications, social media, or at a church on the weekend and getting in a fight in front of a bunch of people. The point being, you don't want to render yourself ineffective with educating students or in the workplace.
So kind of what I'm hearing is it's an after the fact answer, okay? Because if I go out there and I say, Irmo sucks, I hate Irmo, blah, 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 but nobody cares, nobody does anything, then it's okay. But if people start picketing the school and, 20 newspaper articles and parents calling, now I've disrupted the school work environment, even though what I did was the same. It was the reaction to what I did.
Yeah, actually, administration doesn't sit back and wait for a reaction. Administration will assess each situation case by case, whether it's erupted into something or not. They have to look at the set of facts. The eruption of the disruption adds to it, but what I can tell you is every scenario has its own set of facts, and how it impacts everything has to be decided. But if you just go in with some clear understanding that the administration is going to be conscious that there's a U.S. Supreme Court decision that talks about expression and speaking on public concern, coupled with the other more egregious conduct which disrupted things, and that's the balance that you have to take when you look at every scenario. But you don't just say, here's a scenario, if there's no disruption, no one complains about it, it's not an issue. That's not how the administration is going to look at it. They're going to look at all the factors as to whether it impairs your ability to be effective in the classroom or whatever else your job might be.
It definitely seems like it could be very ambiguous in today's society because of opinions and what people are going to be offended by or outraged by right now that they may not have been offended by 10 years ago, or that they may not be offended by 10 years from now. I mean, it could be as silly as, I like Chick-fil-A, but somebody else likes Popeyes, or somebody else likes, I happen to like our gas station. The gas station near my house has really good fried chicken. I mean, but if I were to go and say something like that, I mean, that sounds silly, but that could really offend someone, someone else. And so it's hard to know what you should or shouldn't say.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
That isn't like outwardly inflammatory or egregious, with language, or I don't know. I mean, it just makes it very complicated.
It's a very complicated world, and it's not the offensiveness. It's the full picture, right? It's not just you said something that I disagree with or that offends me. That's not.
Right.
Administration can't react that way either. You have to literally look at it with, what's the right thing, what's the factual, what are the facts, and then what's the law going to support if you do act a certain way. And all that matters, and I can't tell you how complicated this has become.
But when you talk about impairing the efficiency of a school environment, it is about what is outrageous or offensive. If it causes, outrage in an entire class or an entire school or an entire staff, that to me, that could be disruptive to the workplace or to the school environment, learning environment.
Those are certainly factors, absolutely. All factors have to be considered.
Right.
Right.
Mr. Hogan, I'm coming back to you, Mr.
Yeah,
Sauer.
thank you. Quick Way is my spot of choice for chicken. But does this policy read differently if, let's say, given the examples that we've used, if one social media is locked down at private and they've got it select with, they determine who sees it, they say something derogatory, does that come into play any different than if, like Kathy said, Irmo sucked on Twitter, right? Is it any?
Irmo does not suck.
It doesn't.
I would not say that. I have not said that.
Just using the examples.
We love you,
Just to
Ms.
be clear, I
Hampton.
graduated from Irmo in 1985. I'm very proud. But
2001, so yeah.
I should have said 1985, though, I realize.
But no, I mean, is it viewed any differently?
That's an excellent question. And what I would say to that is, how does it get to the administration's attention, and what impact does it have? What happens so very often is, I had no idea someone else would see that. I only had 3 people following me. I only had this. But once it's screenshotted and passed around, therein lies the problem. And now I've got someone who I know said or did something. So it's complicated. They're not simple scenarios, but you have to be thoughtful in analyzing it, and anything that comes to the administration's attention, they have to react to in whatever way that's appropriate.
Right. Mr. Scully, did you have? And then I'm coming back.
To your point, come at me, but I'm Team Popeyes. I'm going to direct you to second paragraph, the last sentence. Employees must be familiar with board policies and act in a manner that is consistent with board policies. So my question there is, I'm on the board. I'm not familiar with all of our board policies, and I guess with how is that measured? How are they tested? Do they get training for that? Can we delete that? What was the rationale for putting that in there?
The rationale for that sentence is to make it clear that while this policy attempts to highlight particularly policies that are staff conduct related to students, the highlight policies that are sort of the weapons issues, the drugs, the alcohol, the tobacco, those types of things, that by no means is that. You want to be careful, and this is kind of probably the lawyer mind of me, you want to be careful not to say, well, I was only told, I read there were 12 policies cited in staff conduct, and none of the rest of them apply to me. I mean, there are other policies, like a sick leave policy that says you can't violate how you use sick leave. I mean, that's still a policy you have to comply with, and there are many, many policies, particularly in Section G, for employees that they're expected to be familiar with. And you have an employee handbook, which is going to reference many, many district policies and board policies that would be applicable to them. So it's just meant to be clear that this is not intended to be an exclusive list, that this is the only thing that applies to employees, but to say, broadly, you must comply with all policies. It's not to trick anybody, it's just you're highlighting the ones you continually refer to when you're dealing with staff conduct with students and other sort of obvious violations that deal with sort of the alcohol, drug, tobacco, those types of things. And bullying and harassment is one, those types of things. So that's the purpose
I guess the
of it.
word must is kind of throwing me there. Could that be changed to should instead of must? Or, I mean, we don't even agree with we have 8 or 7 different interpretations of the board policy, for example. So which interpretation must they be familiar with?
Or employees are expected to be familiar with policies? Would that be helpful? Or something?
Yeah, I would.
Certainly.
I'm just.
I think on a operational side, and Dr. Turner, you may be able to speak to this, we know when it comes to the full scope of board policy, that's a lot to read. When it comes to G policies, we get a little specific. And so while we don't do tests, we do certificates that they have to earn annually. And if you can explain that process, I think anytime, our attorneys are kind of famously stopped in the grocery stores because we do the videos and you receive certificates. And I think every employee has to do that in addition to the employee handbook. And that's our accountability system. We used to do it on the first day. Everyone had to sit down and we would go through page by page of the employee handbook. Teacher said, look, don't do this, give us some autonomy to do it independently. So if you can kind of speak to, on the G policies, which are the staff policies, how we do that for our staff.
And one of the things I thought about, Mr. Scully, in when you asked your question was, a part of this statement, believe it or not, is to be extremely protective of employees. There are a number of cases that I've dealt with, even in my role in human resources, that employees have said, I wish I would have known. I never knew that. There are a number of employees that come to us through alternative certification that may not have been exposed to everything the traditionally trained educator has been exposed to. So this is really an emphasis to really let employees know, take time to educate yourself. We support that at the beginning of each year, all of our employees are required to do an online training module. And because of feedback that we've received from employees that find themselves, unfortunately, having HR conversations with us, and I think they're sincere. They really say, I wish someone would have emphasized that more. What we've tried to do is we even follow up with supervisors, and we say, hey, you still have a handful of employees that haven't completed these modules, that haven't completed these trainings. So there is the video training that SCASA puts out, and I think that's become a popular mode of communication for many districts. We do require all of our employees certified in support to complete those training modules. In addition to that, there is the handbook. In that handbook, it's not every policy, but it's the key G policies, like staff conduct with students, Title IX. It's those major policies that employees tend to find themselves sometimes sitting on the wrong end of the employment spectrum on. So the 2 modules, the employee handbook, and we try to emphasize different things for principals to emphasize to their employees. So I think it ends up being a bit protective, and I think we do try to overemphasize it because that's the only way we know for employees to educate themselves to protect themselves really in situations.
I appreciate that. And so I guess my concern there is obviously I would be concerned that it would be used to be punitive against them, but I appreciate that you say that it is protective. And then I guess if it ever comes down to a question from a labor issue, what is the administration protected? Because if the employee is disciplined in some manner for not being familiar with the policy, how are we protected from administratively? Did we appropriately train them on the policy that they're being, disciplined for or whatever? So I guess that's kind of the root of my concern there. But if you think that it's more beneficial than not, then I appreciate that.
I think it is, and most of the conduct discipline would largely fall under what's really addressed here. I don't think it's going to be some of the extraneous stuff, but you just don't want to leave it out as if it's not important.
Mr. Satterfield.
Yeah, and I was going to just make a suggestion. If I was a principal and I had you've got 7 people here asking questions. If I had 200 employees sitting in my cafeteria and I'm reviewing this policy and a myriad of hands start going up with a lot of questions, I would ask that while we're going through this process, it's kind of like my question about to impair the efficiency of the school, the workplace. If we can find a way to work on this to make this as clear and specific. The previous policy says, oh, you can't fight. You can't fight at school. You can't steal. You can't destroy school property. Those things are very obvious, to when you're explaining it to somebody. They walk out and they go, well, no, I can't fight. I can't drink alcohol at school. I can't do this and I can't do that. But a lot of this is very ambiguous in the language. And when I'm trying to explain it to teachers, and then if I have a parent who gets upset because of something that they read on social media, if it's not, I don't want to say easy to interpret, but a little more specific, I guess I'm searching for a word here. I would just encourage you when you're going through this process that we come up with something a little more specific. I'm going to just use that word. But I did have one question. I know that Mr. Hogan asked a question just to throw some gasoline on the fire there. What if I have a social media account and somebody else makes an inappropriate comment on my account? Am I responsible for that?
That's obviously a good question as well, and what I'll say broadly is how it's addressed in conduct is going to be the full set of facts, right? But you didn't make the comment if it was responsive to your comment, but I've seen scenarios where a firestorm gets involved. Sure. When you start somewhere and it's your name's in the middle of a comment and things come into play. So it's not your comment. Like for the Fourth Circuit in Grutzmacher, that's one of the important parts about that case is the Grutzmacher court says in the footnote, which is fascinating, you've got a Fourth Circuit group of judges who are saying that liking, sharing, retweeting, whatever you're doing to the social media message constitutes the same thing as if it were your speech, right? So if you're thumbs upping it, liking it, sharing it, whatever the other terms you can do, because I don't do all this stuff myself, then you're responsible. But if someone is commenting on it, that obviously is not the same as you're liking it and sharing it and retweeting it.
Yeah, there's so many scenarios with social media. So many variables. And as we go through this process, over the next year or two, I'm sure it's going to change tremendously. But I was just curious, if somebody else makes a comment on my post and somebody else screenshots it and says, well, Mr. Satterfield must agree with that because he didn't take it off his post. Well, I didn't know it was on my post. Again, there are a lot of variables, but getting back to my previous comment, I would try to work on the verbiage so that it's as clear as we can possibly make it so that as the principal, and I certainly hope that all principals are going to sit down with their staff with this sort of policy, because social media runs rampant, through everything we do, so.
So, Mr. Satterfield, I know Ms. Huddle has a comment, but I will say, so this was the policy that was drafted by Ms. Mahoney and presented to the board. So, I'm hearing like different thoughts about what people are thinking about the policy, but when we actually like go and take action on voting for this, it may be that you make a motion to change the language and see if that carries for the
Okay.
board, and if it doesn't, then we move forward. Like, I think that that's probably the most efficient way to move forward with the policy, because there are changes, and I don't want to hold it up based off of, without knowing what the consensus is.
Right,
or
I
what
just
the
thought we
what
were having.
everybody want,
I agree with you 100%.
Okay,
I just
so-
thought we were having an open discussion
Oh,
about the
yeah,
policy. so.
absolutely. But, well, I just because you were like, well, I'd like to see you come back with this, I just want to make sure that, so if we put this on the agenda for next time, if we make a motion, if there's language that wants to be shifted, that we make a motion, and if that carries, then we figure that out during that first reading process. Ms. Huddle?
I'm wondering, I'm taking totally different kind of subject about something, whether or not it should be added to this. And that is, this policy right now is really heavy on social media and that kind of thing. I looked, and I don't think we have a policy that really addresses portrayal of political beliefs in the classroom. There's a policy on controversial teaching that kind of touches on it, but I guess what I'm getting at is, again, I'm just going to use an example because that's how I think, and it's, where does it say, if I'm a teacher, can I go in my classroom and put up a Right to Life flag and, Bible verses and, stuff like that? And am I allowed to do that? And if not, what policy says I can't do that, or I can do that?
So GBEB, in the same fourth paragraph that talks about the social media, is really talking about expression entirely. It encompasses everything. And the sentence that says the board expects employees to ensure all their conduct and communications, including those associated with social media, do not disrupt or impair the efficiency of the workplace. That's the exact same sentence that you would apply in any other situation like that. And to Mr. Satterfield's point made earlier, what's important in a board policy is that you have a policy that, if challenged on the underlying conduct you're addressing, you don't want simultaneously there to be a challenge to the policy itself not being defensible legally. So what is in this policy that I'm presenting to you is legally defensible language, which is based strictly on the case law. So your board policy that says the two phrases that come from the U.S. Supreme Court decision and the Fourth Circuit decision, that's straight out of case law. So it's hard to argue in a court. You shouldn't have those sentences, which are the exact standard that are applied time and time again in case law. Now, is that to suggest that courts and lawyers get it right and are they clear? I'm not saying that necessarily, right? And that comes in the details and how you train administrators. And this video that we do annually dives into the details. It's the same kind of conduct, what you do in a classroom, what you post, what you say, what you wear, what you put on social media, all that is expression. And all that would be addressed in the same exact way within this policy.
Does that, though, stop us from still laying out some specifics? Does it stop us from expanding on the policy and saying, you will not have flags in your classroom other than country flags? Or you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I'm just struggling if I was an employee, how do I know what I can do and I can't? You know what I'm saying? I've had parents contact me that are not happy that we have people that have certain flags in their classrooms. And those teachers don't really know, I don't think this policy is going to help them know, can they do that or not?
So that is prime material that I'm talking with just about any district I'm working with right now across the state. Each situation that presents itself case by case. If you start to articulate specific examples in a board policy, then that's where you get into, does somebody's Are their rights impacted here? Are there rights of students impacted? Are there rights of employees impacted? Where does the First Amendment come into play? Where does the disruption piece come into play? So when you start breaking it down, and you can do this and you can't do this, that's when you could get a policy which is constitutionally on its face a problem, which is why if you stick with the rules of what the courts are saying and then you apply each one individually, that's what I would recommend for the board's role to be in your policy. The application is where it's complicated.
But in a facility that we own, we can't make rules about, I mean, my spouse worked for the Department of Corrections, and they had very strict rules. You couldn't put a picture of your family on your desk, okay, because of, so can we not do that when we own the building?
School districts can make rules within buildings and how you handle things, but they've got to be consistent, and they can't vary, and they can't impact. I mean, all different rights pop up. I mean, there are rights of multiple players involved. So that's why putting rules and specific items and policies are not the ideal way to address that. The ideal way is to look at it, as I know Dr. Ross is having to do, more holistically.
Well, one of the things I may, Madam Chair, and you brought up this point earlier, what we have done is try to create a policy and a rule all at the same time. I think what would be best is to adopt this as policy or a draft, and then there could be an R policy. If you look at our board policy about conduct with students, you see a policy and then you see a rule. Under the rules, you'll see the will nots, will nots. And so what we're into now is, that this isn't the Fourth Circuit, it's not Supreme Court. Right, so we've had Ms. Mahoney come and speak to all of our principals and assistant principals. And we are realizing we're living history right now as we address issues of expression. And when you look at the Pickering decision, it was not a, total freedom of speech. There was a test that came out of Pickering that it was, it wasn't disruptive, but and it could be false, right? So there are some limits. So I think probably what's best is that we look at the policy, which will be broad, and then we may come back with an R type, which would kind of outline that. But to be full disclosure, and I think, you're reading between the lines, we have seen, because of the pivotness of this and unsettling of the case law, that it might not be what we've seen historically as our will nots. There may be some may nots in there. So, but I think the policy is written broad for that, and the rules are brought down narrow to be more clear, if that makes sense.
All right. What a robust conversation. All right. Are we good? All right. Thank you, Ms. Mahoney. Thank you,
Ms.
Dr.
Mahoney.
Turner. We appreciate you. Okay, so that brings us to 18 on our agenda, which is a discussion on a sales tax exemption for capital projects under Exhibit I. So I brought this forward, and I just kind of want to explain to you why and what this is, and we may. I wanted, because we can't just have conversations and we need to discuss it as a board, I printed out, or Dr. Ross printed out an email that was sent to me by a chair of another school district in McCormick County, and he sent it to every chair, I believe, to every school district in the state, and he called me about it, and we had a conversation about what they were doing in McCormick regarding sales tax exemptions. And I just wanted to bring it to the board to see if this was something that we're interested in having a conversation about, talking to the administration about, and potentially reaching out to our delegation, advocating for them to take a position in modifying legislation. So the email that he sent out to all of the school boards was for a request to consider advocating modification of current state law to exempt school districts from paying sales tax for all purchased services and materials. they sent a letter to each of their legislators and their delegation that basically requested a modification to exempt all South Carolina school districts from the payment of all sales tax for purchased services and materials. Currently, sales tax exemptions for school districts is limited to the purchase of textbooks, periodicals, and some technology materials, etc. Since school districts receive revenue through taxation, it makes little sense for districts to pay taxes with revenue gained through tax. Expending district revenue for sales tax has the effect causing need to pass on to local citizens additional tax through added mills on property tax duplicates. And so basically the conversation that I had with Mr. Wilson was that there is the idea that we might be paying double taxes. So if we have a capital project and the vendor doesn't have a sales tax exemption form, that they may be passing on the cost for the sales tax for materials onto the district, which means that we're paying, we have to raise mills to pay for the capital, improvements or new buildings. But then we're also paying sales tax that's being passed on to us by construction companies. I am not an expert in all of this, so full disclaimer. But to me, I have questions about whether or not, that is something that we should be advocating for. Apparently, several other states, like Ohio, have sales tax exemption forms that their construction vendors are given, so that they're exempt from paying sales tax on materials for capital improvements or construction. I'm not sure how that impacts our district, how that impacts our district. McCormick is not really a comparable district to District 5. It is very small. I think that they have 600 students. We have 600 students in most of our schools, and we have 23 schools. So, it is not the same. But if this is something that, Ms. Paul and Dr. Ross think that could potentially save us dollars and help us reduce mills or what have you, I would love to know y'all's feedback and to maybe get more information, or I don't know if this is something that the board would consider writing a letter to our delegation or to the State Fiscal Affairs Authority to ask them what that looks like for school districts. I've kind of tried to ask around from different school board members that I know in different districts, and there may have been a conversation about this publicly before any of our time. And so, I'm being transparent about that. There may be an answer that we are just not talking about, but and y'all may have answers that I don't, or you may have already heard about this. So I wanted to throw this out on the table of what, if this is something that we're considering, if we would want to consider to get more information about, or if we know information currently, or Ms. Paul, if you've heard of this or asked around about it. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. So I did get forwarded this email when you initially sent it. And so, the initial email talks about a sales tax exemption just in general for school districts, so not just specific to capital projects, just in general. My first thought with that is that since we are so heavily funded by state revenue, then that would impact the state side of it. So my concern is, okay, well, if we are sales tax exempt in general, what does that look like in terms of revenue that actually comes to our district through the general fund? I did take a look at the state budget. About 35% of the state budget revenues comes from sales tax. I don't know what percentage of that is made up from school districts or if that would be easy to find, but that's kind of where my concern goes. Just in general, to just totally exempt school districts, I could see the impact being greater from a revenue standpoint. If we're talking just capital projects, that is funded through property taxes. So our capital projects do get funded through our debt service millage, which does not have that state component to it. But I wasn't aware of, Ohio and how they logistically do that with a third party. Because, when we contract with a vendor or general contractor, we're not directly purchasing any materials. That vendor is purchasing them on our behalf to build X facility. But if there's a way that other states are doing this, I'd be interested to hear. I just don't know how logistically that would work, since we, for the most part, when we're under construction, we're not we're not the ones actually purchasing the materials. It would be a third-party vendor purchasing them for us.
Do we know if our state agencies, do we know if they pay sales tax? Like, I don't know, Department of Revenue, if they buy stuff, do they pay sales tax?
I'm not sure offhand, but I can certainly look into it.
Okay, because I'm just thinking if they don't, that's a really good case that we shouldn't have to.
Well, and so one of the things that was told to me about how this even was discovered was that there was a board member that was reviewing invoices and noticed the sales tax line item on an invoice, and that was and I guess there may have been, I don't want to misspeak or mischaracterize a statement, but maybe there was a construction background by that board member, and that may have triggered that question. So it's really, to me, I would just like to know what that, first of all, if on our invoices from any of our capital improvements or major construction projects, if that's something that we notice on that, if sales tax is included, and then what that overall impact would be if we got an exemption. I mean, or who is it that we need to ask those questions to or have those conversations with before we send, I'm not sure how many districts are sending this letter, but I just figured it was worth us having a conversation about that. So,
Madam Chair, we have our Midlands Superintendent's Roundtable coming up. We'll add this as a discussion item just to see if that's kind of the general consensus, and I think we can bring that back to this body.
Mr. Scully?
Yeah, Madison kind of eloquently said exactly what I was thinking. I think we'd be biting the hand that feeds us in that case if we were to do that. So my first reaction is it's probably not a viable or a good idea. The other thing is, teachers are state employees. Their revenue comes from taxation. So do they get to be exempted from paying sales tax? I'd love it, but I just don't think it's very viable.
I don't know that's. I don't know. I don't know how it actually plays out. So I don't know if that's comparable or not. I just don't know. Miss.
I think it's definitely something that we should look at. What harm does it do
Right.
to look at it? I was curious, do we charge anybody sales tax? Like, do we have to charge sales tax on lunches or anything like that?
So lunches, we do not, but when we pay an invoice to US Foods, there are certain things. So the food portion of it, we actually don't have to pay sales tax on that. But any commodities or supplies, we have to pay sales tax on it. So there's certain things that we do. But as far as a student, we don't charge sales tax. But I do think actually with adults, I believe that we do charge sales tax to adults. But in general, the $3.30 just encompasses the entire cost of everything that student nutrition would have to pay for.
Okay, well, I just wanted to bring that up to the board because it was presented to me. So, Dr. Ross, if you bring that to the Midlands Superintendent Advisory Board, or if anybody hears of anything, I just wanted to have that conversation collectively, and just kind of let us know our thoughts. So, yeah.
I'm going to break Matt's heart. I move that we adjourn.
Any discussion? All right. Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? The motion carries 7-0. We are adjourned.